Hello everyone, how are you? I am Dr. Samantha Hiew. I'm really happy to be here today to be speaking to you about our human experience of neurodivergence on Neurodiversity Pride Day. And I'm going to share some slides because I prepared something for us. I'm actually going to go straight into sharing my backstory about why I founded ADHD Girls. So I was 40 when I realized that there was a label that explained a lot of the challenges that I faced in my life. And when I founded ADHD Girls, it was really a desperate attempt to try and figure out where in the world of work I belong. Because I was 30 when I finished my career in cancer research, having a deep love for science for as long, as I've lived, but then never really managed to fit into academia in a science lab. Whilst I loved the concept, the scientific discoveries, trying to put two ideas together to create a hypothesis and then testing it. I wasn't so good at creating consistent experiments in order to figure out and trust my own results. And because of that, I ventured into 16 different industries, which now seems very much normalized, a squiggly career, a non-linear career. It's something that we should celebrate. But at the time, we're talking, over 10 years ago, it was a recipe for an existential crisis. So I've also identified with being autistic since I was diagnosed, which kind of made more sense, seeing that, I had a deep need for understanding the process of everything in life and seeing everything, from minute detail to to the system. And apart from being a neurodivergent myself, I've also given birth to two neurodivergent children who are incredible human beings, and I love. But having to parent them has revealed a lot of challenges within myself, which I'm learning and healing alongside them. And I think part of the reason why my work has been so impactful is because a lot of the work I do is based on lived experience research and learning alongside the community. And to date, I've won some awards and thankfully, have been somebody who, can make sense of our experience, and people do have a certain level of trust, of. So ADHD Girls was really founded to empower neurodivergent women with ADHD to thrive in society. But along the way, I realized that we could only go so far, championing a group of underrepresented individuals. But if we don't get the rest of the world on board, I'm talking about the work and education settings here, then our advocacy will only go so far. So my work now is about bridging the gap, the empathy gap between those with lived experience of neurodivergence and those who don't. And I do that through my work as a neurodiversity and intersectionality keynote speaker. So early on in my diagnosis, I talked to you about my existential crisis, which lasted over a decade. And in that time, I was always scanning around looking for a place that I belong. And because it was incredibly challenging to do so, I struggled with some mental health challenges. But then when I founded ADHD Girls, I realized that there were other people like me. When I interviewed many neurodivergent women with ADHD around the world and realized that despite united by a common condition, which is ADHD, the way we present was different across different geographical locations. And so that led me to dig deeper and created a campaign, which I collaborated with QBTech, an amazing company, to figure out, what are these hidden stories across different life circumstances that we are not talking about in a podcast campaign called Utopia. So today, I'll be talking to you about a few things. So I'm going to start with compare and contrast between neurodiversity then and now, what our perceptions are, what has changed, and the three things that we should really think about around neurodiversity, and how our life in society and the degrees of differences can impact how we show up and therefore change the needs that we have in terms of support. What are the impacts of living with a brain that you didn't understand? And maybe zoning to my favorite examples, which is a lived experience that I can identify with as a neurodivergent woman. What are the challenges around diagnostics? What our early lives were like, and what happened when our mask slipped, and what caused this to slip, as well as some hope, for our collective healing and growth going forward, and what is the way forward, alongside with some resources. So in the olden days, neurodiversity was known as something very, very different. So let's play a game here. Can you guess which neurodivergence these psychiatrists and physicians are referring to, and pediatricians are referring to? So the first one, he was describing somebody who seemed detached from reality and has an absolute predominance of their internal lives. So they're very inward. And the second describes somebody who lacks empathy, with little ability to form friendships, very one-sided conversation, intense absorption in special interests, and clumsy movements. Could be an easy one. So, and the third, referring to somebody who has an abnormal defect of moral control, and affected children could not control their behavior in the same way a typical child would. These children were still intelligent. And so what they were talking about were the first children who were identified with being autistic, with Asperger's syndrome, and someone who appeared to have ADHD traits. And all three of these were white boys. And if you can see the irony of the person who is presenting this, I am not a white boy. And I wonder what I'm doing here. And so someone like me would never hope, to even figure out their own neurodivergence in these circumstances. So it's not until 1998 that Harvey Bloom published Neurodiversity in the Atlantic. And so the idea hit the mainstream media. But he was really referring to the Autism's Right movement, right? And the hint is in the byline here on the neurological underpinnings of geekdom. But now, though, neurodiversity is known as a very different thing. And very recently, there's a paper that's been published really going into an overdue correction on the origins of neurodiversity theory. And in this paper, they talked about the origins as something that came from a group of autistic individuals. We're really talking about neurological diversity. So, and then, instead of it being a coin, the term being coined by a single person, it was actually a term that was collectively coined by the neurodiverse community. But as you can see, the people who are now being diagnosed with ADHD and autism are very different from the people who are used to be known, to have autistic ADHD traits or dyslexic traits. And so very recently, you've seen a huge rise in neurodivergent women and girls who were diagnosed. And also the neurodiversity movement has seen a very strong uprising in the workplace with the now publication of the Canary Code, a really brilliant book by Professor Ludmila Proslova on neurodiversity, dignity, and intersectional belonging at work. I love that there is more of that coverage on intersectional identities to really give a flavor on the diversity in diversity. And so from thinking that autistic individuals were, like somebody who could not hold eye contact, do not have empathy, cannot hold a social conversation, we see more and more with the neurodiverse community talking about their experience, about their lived experience. And we know that there is a diversity of empathic experience. Some autistic individuals may, may not display much communication or empathy, but then also there are some deep level of empathy that cannot be explained in the same way as non-neurodivergence, but more as a style of effective empathy where we feel empathy in our body rather than something that we think, very rationally. The workplaces also see neurodiversity as a competitive advantage. There are more support now given to offenders in the prison population in order to cut crime. And people are also talking about how to navigate a neurodiverse relationship, right? It's a mixed neurotype relationship. So hopefully this shows you that neurodiversity is here to stay. The Guardian newspaper has a section on a guide to ADHD and autism. And there are a huge rise in diagnosis. And part of this rise is contributed by people like me who flew under the radar for decades. And as you can see here, from 1998 to 2018, there's been a 787% increase in autism diagnosis. In 2019 to 2021, in the onset of the pandemic, 3,200% increase in women who took online tests for ADHD. What you need to know about neurodiversity, there's a lot you need to know, but there's three things, is that no two brains are the same, everyone sees differently, but the neurodiversity movement, affirms the social model of disability and really champions those who have been marginalized for their brain differences, living in society, and differences in the way you think, learn, and process information, behave, and feel in the world. And some of the examples of neurodivergence are ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, developmental language disorder. And whilst these are neurodevelopmental conditions that can be inherited, through the bloodline, there are also some acquired neurodivergence that we don't talk about enough. Whether it's through traumatic brain injury or, illness, and also our life circumstances, such as long COVID. This is something that we need to understand that should also make its way under the neurodiversity umbrella. But for us, neurodivergence who are diagnosed later in life, there is a huge need, yes, for accessibility, and that is to access society's work and education systems so we can, work, live, fulfill our potential. But more importantly, there is also a really big need for mental well-being, mental health. Because if you've lived up until, say, the age that I am or even older, and then you were missed, the adaptations that you have to make living in society would have caused a significant amount of mental health challenges. But your mental health will ebb and flow according to your environment. And there is a really big need for psychological safety for neurodivergence. And then we talk about neurodiversity in more of an innate sense. But then our life in society, our cultural diversity also add degrees of differences. So you think about our biology, the genes that we inherit from our parents, but these genes are continuously, getting feedback from the environment. And our experience in life, starting from early nurture, to our life in society, the positions we occupy within society, as well as our current life circumstances, these continuously interact with us in order to mark our genes so that we can, say, express certain proteins or, not express certain proteins based on the environment in which we live in. So our cultural diversity really plays a very strong role in shaping the way we manifest our neurodiverse experience. And so whilst you have to live with a brain that you don't understand, you have to adapt. And this has an effect on your self-esteem, where you got to in education, because most of society was not really made for our way of being, really. And so you either have to, be really lucky to get through the education system, have an high IQ, or you've developed a swim or sink mentality. And for many of us, it was pretty much a swim or sink. And whether or not we then go on to fulfill our potential really depends on the degree of privilege or oppression that you have in your circumstance. It also affects the quality of your relationships, the type of people that you've really form relationships with, and how the relationships then went. It also affected our health and well-being, and how we continuously scan for safety and belonging. And by doing that, we've had to also adapt very quickly, think on our feet, and these adaptations do have an effect on our mental health. And so just to bring in an example of an identity that I can identify with as a neurodivergent woman, this is a talk that I tend to give quite often, and it is also a subject very close to my heart because not only that I'm a neurodivergent woman, I also have a daughter with ADHD. I also run a company, championing neurodivergent women and speak to the community about what it's like to live in our shoes. And so there are very important differences. There are sex differences in the women's brain. So research has shown that there are brain differences in the neurodivergent women's brain compared to someone without the neurodivergence. Also, if you think about what is nature, the genes, that we were born with, the differences in terms of our brain, and then the rules that we're given when we're born in society, what it tells us is right to do, what it tells us is wrong to do. And these social rules really affect the way you look at yourself, affect what you think is a problem. They also affect your ability to ask for help. And so many neurodivergent women tend to mask because we were not really encouraged to be ourselves from a very, very young age. And this masking caused significant health challenges at a time when your body are also changing. If you think about the life of a neurodivergent girl, growing up in the world, hitting puberty, and then becoming a young woman, and then entering, different hormonal transitions in her life as she becomes a mother, or, when she enters perimenopause, and then to later in life when she hits some different health milestones. And all these health challenges from masking and juggling demands, really impact how we then show up, because our biology affects our psychology and our emotions. So part of the reasons why women and girls were misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and flew under the radar for ages is because as girls, we were socialized from a very young age, to have a certain behavior expected of us, to know what to say, to know what to do in an environment that continuously need us to be a certain way. And as a result of that, we've internalized a lot of our challenges. And also, it doesn't help that professionals are unaware of hormonal impact. So when we find ourselves in a doctor's office or a psychiatrist's office, we are diagnosed based on our behaviors that they can see on the surface. Most of this are very gender orientated, on what how we perceive a woman who acts a certain way. And it was not until recently that professionals admitted that ADHD can exist in women. It is not only that it can exist in women, but it also is a highly impairing and potentially dangerous condition for girls and women, especially when we have lived for a long time thinking that the problem is a character flaw rather than a neurological underpinning. And so when we get diagnosed with ADHD, we've really had to relook our entire life and figure out, really what happened. That tend to be something that a lot of people experience, and looking into what happened to me, what happened to you, what are the causes, what are the root causes of ADHD. And very recently, one of the psychiatrists who specialize in the field of ADHD, Dr. William Dodson, published an article in Attitude talking about ADHD as a whole life experience, and that DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that psychiatrists use to diagnose mental health conditions, that needs to reflect our whole life experience and how that changed across the lifespan. whether that is gonna be something that's reflected in our emotions, our cognitive ability, as well as our ability, to maintain relationships. So if you look at what happened back when we were girls, a lot of it does make sense. Because as girls, we go into the school environment trying to figure out what is expected of us. Instructions are given. We might not understand it because instructions were given in a way that we wouldn't be able to visualize, or maybe we wouldn't have heard it, or if we did hear it, we couldn't remember, everything that was said. So already with these differences, we have to find ways to cope very quickly, to adapt, to our environment. We might have to mask, we might have to hide it, we might ask for help from our friends, if we're lucky to be able to have friends. If we aren't able to do it, then we'll find a way to adapt very quickly to our detriment. When we're old enough, our nervous system will develop to an extent that will make us seek certain ways to mask and self-medicate the differences that we have in the ADHD brain, which is around the reduced levels of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, norepinephrine, but also serotonin, glutamine, and other neurotransmitters that are known to present at suboptimal levels, in the ADHD brain. But this affects our self-esteem, it affects our mental health, it affects how we present. And by the age of 12, girls with ADHD would have heard at least 20,000 negative messages. Those who have elevated ADHD symptoms tend to make fewer plans for the future than their peers, which affect the fulfillment of potential. And there are behaviors, that girls with ADHD tend to exhibit, and it largely comes down to these behaviors of meltdown, where you might have an involuntary outburst due to lots of sensory inputs in your head, and you can't seem to make sense of how to express it. Or we might shut down in order to internalize and try and recover from all the the speed of things that are thoughts and feelings and emotions that are going on in our head, that we have to, be in a corner and try and recover that way. Or we may also double down our effort in order to give people what they need, but by being perfectionists. But this creates a mental health challenge, such as anxiety, and later depression, when we realize that we cannot meet the standard that we set for ourselves. Some of us might also, have found comfort in being the class clown, because it's a personality in which people really enjoy, having us around. But what happens when you cannot mask? And what are the conditions in which it is incredibly difficult to mask? With neurodivergence, I found 3 different situations and a life circumstance where it can be incredibly difficult for us to hide our differences. And it ranges from having low energy when the demands from our environment far exceeds our ability to cope, and our tendency to double down, to put in more effort, to work harder, to do just that bit more, to take on more responsibilities, to care for others, to look after other people, and not support ourselves, eventually burning out because we aren't asking for help. We aren't able to put a stop to, our work or our life, that is constantly, has demands on us. We're incredibly overwhelmed, chronically overwhelmed. We add the hormonal impact that tends to, happen every month. And some women, neurodivergent women, tend to find it very difficult during the luteal phase of the hormonal cycle, where our estrogen levels tend to dive and progesterone levels goes up, because estrogen has been known to be a neurotransmitter that acts indirectly regulates not just dopamine, but also serotonin and acetylcholine, which are the neurotransmitters. Dopamine is the molecule of reward and motivation. Serotonin, really regulates our well-being, and acetylcholine affects a lot of executive functioning, which includes sleep and rise and appetite, as well as cognitive abilities. So if you think about the challenges that neurodivergent women go through when estrogen is low and progesterone is high, and you think about the times in her life where these changes could occur, whether this is something that begins as early as puberty to, perimenopause. And before that, maybe childcare, maybe that's pregnancy and childbirth, but also another reason when the mask could slip is when we face relational injury. But the reason I put rejection sensitivity dysphoria here is because it's very difficult to put a lid on our emotions when we face rejection. And this is not only because of our biological underpinning, it's not only because the ADHD brain has a way to go from 0 to 100 very quickly, but also some of the triggers that we face in our day-to-day relationships hold, they are responded by our traumatic imprint that came from early attachment issues, as well as the attachment issues that occur in the relationships, that we've gone through in our lives, including perhaps our current relationships. So it can be incredibly difficult to mask when we face the flooding of emotions during an episode of RSD. So to summarize, there's a great article I found that really validated my experience being a woman with ADHD, where you're often the support system, where you think that you have to support other people, but not actually being the person who deserves support. And that really hit me. When I read that, I just thought, okay, that's totally why I created a company, to support other people whilst actually, really struggling actually in my own life to face all the demands that I had in the day-to-day. And really recovery starts from understanding that this mindset doesn't serve us, that it's okay, to ask for help, that it's okay to seek support. And self-awareness is really the first step in forgiving yourself, forgiving other people, and to accept and love yourself. And I know I've given the example of neurodivergent women's experience in society because we really do deserve a headline, really. But to collectively heal and grow as a community, man or women or any other gender identity, wherever you come from, whatever identity that you occupy within society, you need to understand what you need to appear and show up in your optimal state, as someone who has a very different biology to what is typical. Because the biological difference is not just in the mind, but also in our body, and it manifests as many physical health conditions too. And also understanding the patterns of behavior in how you show up and how that is influenced by your history, and knowing how you show up in your daily life would really help you in understanding what you need, in order to grow as a person. So moving forward, I've put together some holistic strategies that you can employ even without a diagnosis, or if you are diagnosed and you may not want to consider medication. And even when you have your medication, these are still some of the things that you have to do, because the pills don't make skills, and some of the skills are really in the way you manage your day-to-day life. But first of all, I would really start by doing a life stage audit and really looking at where you are in your life right now. What are your circumstances? What are the demands, that you have in your day-to-day? And can you meet those demands? And these are some of the ways in which you can help yourself. and really start with diet and nutrition, where we can get a lot of the micronutrients and the macronutrients that are known to be present at reduced levels in the neurodivergence physiology. And so you don't need me to tell you this. A lot of neurodivergents do have issues with sleep, whether it's taking a longer time to sleep or sleeping later into the day or taking longer to fall asleep. But we all know and can agree that when we sleep well, then some days it's almost like we don't even have ADHD, and I'm not alone in saying this. And the problem is that sleep can be quite irregular for us, and especially when you add the added complexity of hormonal changes, this can definitely impact our sleep quality. Our exercises also will help our body, generate some of the neurotransmitters that we need in order to perform in our day to day. We also have a very difficult relationship with stress, I would say, because as neurodivergents, if you tend to be someone who have increased sensitivity to the world, being more sensitive to noise, to smell, to touch, to everything, already there is a physical stress element in it. And then when you add how we then go and look for stressful situations in order to charge our brain, whether this is through work or, unwittingly taking ourselves into situations where if we're self-medicating, we may be increasing, our stress levels and decreasing our resilience, towards stress. Because neurodivergents tend to have a lower vagal tone, where we may have also a more rigid nervous system, where we can flip between hyper arousal and hypoarousal, where we can be quite then and it can be quite difficult for us to achieve a middle ground, in terms of being in a window of tolerance. And so it's really important for us to, create boundaries before we get to the level or the point of no return where our energy levels are already too low. So it's really important at this stage of our lives to protect our energy and to understand what we need, in order to fill our tank. And so when you have periods of, really appreciating what you have in your environment, seek out more awe-inspiring activities and mindfulness-based practices that can help you regulate your emotions and your thoughts. And also, if you are interested to find out what is contributing to you showing up in a certain pattern time and again, when similar triggers appear in your environment, then it is a good idea to seek out a compassionate therapist who can perhaps look at the information within the label that you come with, whether it's neurodevelopmental or mental health labels. And really look at what are the information within the label so they can work with, the traits that you do identify with, that you do struggle with, so that you can rewrite history, and while you go through therapy, there might be, the difficult element of having to relive some of the trauma. So it's a good idea to practice some trauma release exercises like yoga and Pilates, and also go to some somatic therapy to release the trauma that you're feeling in your body. Because we often hold a lot of traumatic imprints and they are felt, in our body. More importantly, is to understand that you are more than a label. You are a sum of many parts, and these parts have maybe, disintegrated over your time growing up in society, and having to come back to yourself and reconcile these parts to understand that really ultimately we could, really benefit from having a more cohesive sense of self. And how we do that, is um, firstly, is to connect with like-minded people who can perhaps give us a bit of guidance and safety, a sense of belonging, and also, help us feel less alone on this journey. And that is in really the power of a community that really empowers you and then see you, accept you for who you are, and then facilitate a process of recovery and reparation and healing within yourself. So where we go from here in terms of neurodiversity, I think we are really ripe for understanding the diversity of human experiences and really knowing that our needs change across the lifespan. We will also learn and will need to learn to communicate these needs, especially if these needs are changing and evolving, as you go through different life stages. And ultimately, our health and well-being is a bi-directional communication between the body, mind, and relationships. And you think about the psychosocial model. So, what is within our biology will affect our mental health, and our mental health will affect, how we show up in our relationships. But the other way, the opposite way, is also relevant, where the quality of our relationships affect the quality of our mental health and our physiological health. So we have to think of the body mind as interconnected, and which will then feed into our social environment. And as we go through our processing of what we're going through, the journey that we take, from here, we will be looking for more safety, more psychological safety, emotional safety in our environment, and a sense of belonging, which hopefully, will lead to a time where we can all be on the same team, where our differences as neurodivergence would not be seen as an impairment or a difficulty, but it is purely just differences, right? And we work towards unity in society when we can banish the stigma that comes with a century-old stigma, of neurodivergence. And ultimately, being accepted for who we are, being authentically, present in our lives will allow us to grow as individuals. So thank you so much for listening to me this evening. It's been great to be here, and I'm really happy to share what I learned so far in the field of neurodiversity. So when I started in this journey, I was really keen to figure out the root causes of ADHD and what happened to us, as a collective. So I hope that, this gives you a flavor of where I've got to in terms of, what I think we're going through as a collective community. A lot of the resources that I have are on my website, adhdgirls.co.uk. Created a few workbooks. One of it is especially for neurodivergent women, looking at the tools to thrive beyond medication, and really going into more of the detail around the holistic strategies informed by the neurodiverse community. I've also thought about creating a special workshop, which will launch during ADHD Awareness Month in October. I've given a lot of talks where I talk about the tools to thrive as late diagnosed neurodivergence, especially with ADHD. But I realized that when we look for a diagnosis, we were looking for something to come out of ourselves, to transform our lives, to turn our lives around, right? We were all looking for a reason to be here, a purpose. And I realized in my journey that the skills that help us heal and recover and be in a good mental health state is a different skill to creating a life in which we can fully thrive, and live with authenticity and look for more freedom, and growth that we deserve. So created this workshop, and I hope that you'll join me because it's going to be my first workshop where I really look into post-traumatic growth as neurodivergence with ADHD. So, and if you work in organizations, look me up. I'm your woman. I'm a neurodiversity and intersectionality keynote speaker, and I've spoken to more than 80 companies to date. And a lot of the topics that I do are focused on the human experience and neurodiversity. And this is far more broad than what I've covered here today and far more in depth. So I hope that this gives you a flavor anyway. Happy Neurodiversity Pride Day. I'm really happy to be here, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.